When you think of America, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Is it freedom? Firearms? Fast food? How about football? Televised in over 160 countries across more than 30 different languages, American football is more internationally well known than ever before. Despite the now record high visibility of football around the world, very few people actually know much about its over 150-year history. Even the most hardcore of fans can only go back about 50 or 60 years to the beginning of the Super Bowl era. Over this last summer, I decided to travel down the rabbit hole and research American football's 150-year story from the very beginning to the present day. What I found stunned me and left me utterly speechless. My search both answered burning questions like where did American football come from, who were the early key people in shaping it, and why is it called American football despite having a rule that literally prohibits such behavior. My search also uncovered some absolutely bizarre twists, like how Canadians of all people became critical to the early development of American football, how an American football coach changed basketball forever, and how a US president nearly outlawed the sport entirely. Let me tell you about what I found in The Sometimes Strange History of American Football. Bear with me for a minute through this prologue, as I first have to give a brief history lesson. Before talking about American football, we must talk about the world it was about to be born into. We must talk about American football's parents. Yes, parents. Football as sports had existed around the world for thousands of years. The major problem was that football meant different things to different people, and teams often operated under different sets of rules. The English Football Association attempted to fix this in 1863 by drafting a uniform and universally agreed upon set of rules. Two sports ended up being created out of this conference: association football and rugby football. These sports spread across the world, rapidly invading the US at a pivotal time in the then young nation. The year is 1865, and the US had just come out of a bloody 4-year-long dispute with itself over what role slavery could play in a free democratic country. Although the fighting had been brought to an end, animosity around the country was still at an all-time high. The man in charge, who could have brought about quick healing to the nation, was unfortunately handed a very permanent pink slip by a certain Mr. Booth. This was the state of America at the time these English sports invaded. These football sports quickly went to work helping to heal over wounds and be a great unifier for the people, just as politics had always been a great divider. It was fortunate that these sports came too, because guess what America's most popular sport was before their arrival? It wasn't baseball or boxing. Just close your eyes and imagine a sport of endless brutality, cunning, and savagery. An event that draws crowds in the thousands, cheering their hearts out for hours at a time. A spectacle that bears legends and celebrity icons that every young boy aspires to be like one day. Professional, competitive walking. Yes, you heard me right. And no, this is not a joke. People would pay to watch men not run in a sprint, but walk in an endurance race for over 24 hours at times. Crowds were absolutely fascinated at this concept of walking. Onlookers were betting on the results, with bookies organizing events. There was immense passion in the game. So much so that at one particular event, a spectator angrily leapt onto the track and began to beat up a contestant, all apparently for walking too well. The end of the 1860s brought about a new age in sports, with the invasion of English sports and the invention of baseball. Amateur athletic clubs began forming in various towns and communities as a social activity meant to bring the war-torn communities together again and create hope and optimism for the future. Gradually, these athletic clubs began to be created at the collegiate level by young men attending these colleges in the late 1860s. These young men began experimenting with their own forms of football games. It is unknown as to who exactly invented the sport or when. but someone truly mad took the two dominant football sports at the time and attempted to recombine them and produce an offspring, to which would be America's football. We may not know exactly who invented American football or when, but we do know the time, place, teams, and final score of the first ever official game. Football historians generally celebrate the date of this first ever match on November 6, 1869 as the official birth date of American football. In reality, the sport was probably created several months earlier, with several off-the-books matches being played to test the viability of the new sport before publicly showcasing it. Nevertheless, the teams that took part in this first match were the University of New Jersey, who have since changed their names to Princeton University, hailing from none other than Princeton, New Jersey. Their opponents were hated local rivals Rutgers University, hailing from Piscataway, New Jersey. The game in question was held near Rutgers campus on a barren field in the neighboring town of New Brunswick, New Jersey. Despite this being the first ever official game in American football history, Princeton had already been dubbed the overwhelming favorite heading into this match, with newspapers already congratulating them on their assured victory prematurely. The final result was a 6-4 victory for Rutgers University. The first ever American football match was an upset. Now, most football fans will raise an eyebrow to that score, particularly the 4. Under current rules, that score is possible, but highly unlikely. It is, in fact, one of the rarest of all sightings within the practice of scoregami. The only possible way to achieve 4 points is the ultra-rare double safety. The objective in American football is to progress the ball downfield until you can cross over the opposing team's end zone for a touchdown. A safety is the inverse of that, when the defense is so dominant that they push the offense back into their own end zone. The result is a safety. The defense score 2 points for their team and get possession of the ball back. Safeties are extremely rare and occur only about once every 15 games, so it is rare to see 2 safeties within the same season, much less the same game. Bear in mind as well, your team also has to be offensively inept enough not to score a single other point, so the final score of a 4 is unbelievably rare. Well, if we took your average football fan back in time to be a spectator in that first American football game, what they would see would horrify them. A round ball, not an oval-shaped one, was used. Carrying of the ball was not permitted, and in the most unpredictable twist of any football sport, players were meant to use their feet to kick the ball as a means of progressing it downfield. What barbaric, uncultured people could possibly derive any sport played in such a fashion as entertaining and fun? I mean, God gave us 2 hands for a reason, and that reason was to firmly nestle a pigskin. So back to that first game, that score previously mentioned was actually 6 goals to 4. American football is named such because it actually did once use feet as the main form of play. Of course, this wasn't regular soccer either, as players were allowed to swat the ball with their hands, and rough rugby-style tackling was still at play. This heretical version of American football would annoyingly persist as the standard into the 1870s. Thankfully, American football would eventually be set right thanks to an intervention held by the sport's twin brother. Yes, on top of parents, American football also has a twin brother. Canadian football had been growing parallel of American football at the same time, but whereas American football had taken more after one parent, Canadian football had taken more after the other. This all changed when Harvard's team went up to play a few exhibition matches against nearby Canadian schools. During this time, both teams showcased their respective sports to the other. It was these Canucks that showed Harvard a better way. The Harvard players were entranced by the Canadian game, so much so that upon returning to the States, they refused to play the abomination that was American football at this time, instead attempting to convince their rivals to change over to a rugby-styled game. Thankfully, by the end of the 1870s, virtually all schools had converted, and this silly notion of kicking a ball with your feet was sensibly thrown into the trash where it belongs. And football was right again. Harvard had been carrying the torch, leading the progression of American football throughout the 1870s. They would pass the torch over to their main rivals for the next decade. 1880 would be a landmark year for American football, as perhaps one of the most influential figures in American football history would appear. Yale University was preparing to play in a match. A member from the opposing team looked upon the Yale team and instantly fixed his eyes on one player in particular, a short 5-foot 5-inch man weighing barely 165 pounds who was all geared up in Yale colors alongside his towering teammates. The opposing player trotted over to the Yale team captain and mused, "Surely you don't mean to play with that child? He will get hurt." That child was Walter Camp, the father of modern-day American football. Camp had been a running back in his time with Yale and was a respected and outspoken player when it came to the sport and its future. If you look really closely at a modern-day American football match, you might just spot some of Camp's ideas at work. Walter Camp proposed that from the resting place of the ball, an imaginary line should be drawn across the field, known as the line of scrimmage. From there, one should measure out 10 yards exactly ahead of the ball, at which place a second imaginary line will be drawn, known as the first down line. He then proposed that offenses should be given 4 attempts, or 4 downs, to advance to and surpass the first down line. Failure to do so results in a turnover on the spot to the other team. Successful conversion means another 10 yards are measured out, with the downs being reset to first down, repeating this process until a score or a turnover. Camp would also reduce the number of on-field players from 15 men to 11 men each. Camp would also make the official point scale for all future scores. Walter Camp would go on to coach Yale football, winning 3 national championships and paving the way for the second generation of players and coaches, all of which idolize Camp as their hero. Some of these people we will talk about in the next part. Thank you for watching all the way through. Remember to be thoughtful with the discussions in the comment section. I hope you will tune back in for part 2. In the meantime, here is a clip from it. This man's fate had been cruelly sealed as a literal testament that you don't choose football life chooses you.